The smoke found my throat before the door did, a hot hand closing around my voice and yanking it backward. Heat pushed through the hallway like a crowd in panic, cracking paint into curling petals and fastening orange mouths along the ceiling. Somewhere inside the throb of sirens and the brittle hiss of burning insulation came a sound too small for a night this loud. A broken whimper, high and thin, as if the fire itself had learned to plead. I shouted that I was inside even though the smoke made liars of all words, and I crawled because the hallway insisted. The floor stung through my gloves. My helmet brim caught sparks that winked out like insects against rain. The cry came again, and the house shifted, timbers talking in a language of strain. I pulled my breath through the damp filter, tasted ashen plaster and the stubborn sweetness of a life that refused to be reduced to carbon. "Hold on," I said to a shadow I could not see. Heat rolled over me, a living thing. The whimper sharpened into a syllable. I realized it was not a child. It was a dog, and in that instant the fire, which had been a beast with 1,000 jaws, became a map with only one destination. Tin garden of sparks. The fire begins with bad wiring and a wind intent on teaching the neighborhood how quickly the ordinary ignites. I arrived to find a ranch-style house unraveling itself, smoke squeezing from the eaves, glass sweating and then failing. The cries are mixed. Neighbors, sirens, the impatient chatter of flames gaining grammar. I breach the door to a world that resists the existence of air. The first image I find is not the dog but the family photographs on the wall blistering into a new shape. I move by memory and training, and by the small truth that fear is only useful until you decide it isn't. Somewhere past the collapsed bookshelf, a German shepherd calls from a room that is disappearing by degrees. The chapter ends when we see each other for the first time through a lattice of smoke, and he chooses belief over the evidence of heat. Carry me through the red. Choices fix themselves into action. I get low. Talk with the voice we save for children and animals, and anyone whose terror has made them fluent in silence. The shepherd's paws scramble on a floor that is turning uncertain. I find him wedged between a desk and a wall, fur earth, scorched. Eyes huge and reflective like 2 coins hoarded from the dark. I loop a webbing lead around his chest and lift while the house announces its boredom with remaining a house. We navigate a corridor that has become a river of radiant heat. A backdraft kisses my neck as a room exhales flame. The shepherd hesitates at the threshold where air should be, then leans into me with the weight of a promise. We make it to the porch as the roof chooses the past tense. Outside light hurts. The night opens to receive us both. Learning the cool. Rescue isn't finished at the curb, it just changes temperature. In the aftermath's fluorescent room, the shepherd shakes smoke out of his fur in glittering stars that die before they land. He drinks water in sips that sound like apologies. The vet at the pop-up triage tent reads his lungs and offers the mathematics of recovery: oxygen, rest, watch for the delayed betrayals of heat. At my apartment, which smells of laundry and eucalyptus and other rescues that learn the shape of safety, we invent rituals from scratch. He circles before lying down, the way bodies negotiate terms with sleep. He startles at the kettle's first scream and then learns it is only a promise of warmth. He eats carefully, as if joy is a thing that should be handled with mitts. Growth is the gentlest chapter and the most exacting. The house comes back as weather. The past returns not to haunt but to test. The city has its seasons and so do the saved. One day on a walk, a strip mall kitchen exhaust coughs a smoky breath and the shepherd becomes smaller, the leash suddenly an instrument rather than a suggestion. I kneel. I let him use my shin as a place for his brow to anchor. Another day, a dryer fire alarms the block and he goes to the bathtub, a porcelain bunker. I become quiet next to him until we both hear the difference between a memory and a present. In a training field, he learns commands as a grammar of trust. Heal and stay and leave it pronounced like spells that return the room to itself. The doubt that began in heat dissolves in repetition. The chapter crests when a child at a community event reaches a hand hesitantly toward his chest, and he chooses to be still and let gentleness happen. What the flame gave back. The climax isn't louder than the fire, it is more precise. Months later, at a row house blaze, he comes with the therapy team to steady evacuees whose hands can't keep from rehearsing grief. A neighbor says there's a dog still inside, and I see the shepherd's ears triangulate the chaos like a compass remembering north. I go because that is what the job requires, and because the first rescue made the second inevitable. Inside, the smoke is a cousin, not a stranger. I find a small mixed breed curled under a bed and carry her out, her heart rabbiting against my palm. Outside, the shepherd meets us at the tape line, stands tall but soft, and leans into the girl whose dog I hold. The house hisses itself into compliance behind us. The final chapter resolves at my kitchen window, where morning light patterns the shepherd's back in pale squares, and he, without ceremony, places his brow against my leg. The world is not quieter, I am louder with peace. The front room was the fire's. This is fast, moving and persuasive. Books had slumped into feathery black flutes. The sofa was an ember thinking grandly. The shepherd's voice came from the rear bedroom, a burr of sound pressed flat by smoke. I crawled because the space above my shoulders belonged to heat. Plastic on the blinds had gone soft and was dripping slow glass. The floor tilted under the argument of a bursting water line. I spoke into the dark on every exhale to tell both of us where I was. "Buddy, I'm here," I said, and words condensed inside my mask like warm rain on cold metal. When I reached the hallway, the house did a trick I've seen too often: light strobed behind the smoke, orange and then white, a room swallowing its oxygen in a gulp and belching fire through the door like laughter. I laid flat and waited for that mouth to finish speaking. In that breathless pause, the dog's nails skittered. I slid left, found the bedroom entry, and pushed through into a different weather, a beat lower, hotter, air salted with off-gassing carpet and something sweet, melted plastic toys. The shepherd saw me through the haze and tried to stand. He failed, apologized to the floor in the language of collapse, then tried again. I have seen men do it. I have done it myself. He was wedged behind a desk, lacquered to a high shine by 30 years of hands. The corner bit into his hip. His coat was the color of old sap, patches sinned into dark freckles. Soot had made a mask of his face, except where tears of heat had washed tracks down from the inner corners of his eyes. He did not bark. He made an almost sound, a syllable that could be mistaken for the wind if one wanted to be spared involvement. I did not. I slid the webbing loop around his chest, under his forelegs, avoiding as best I could the tender lift of scorched skin. He flinched the way hurt things do when history repeats itself in the form of help. I braced, pulled once to see how the desk would negotiate with reality, and felt it yield. The house noticed. Something somewhere groaned as if remembering a weight it wished to set down. I touched my gloved hand to the shepherd's temple, a quick, useless benediction. "We're going," I said, and he believed me enough to risk it. The hallway had become the inside of a dragon's breath. Flame feathered along the ceiling. Racing for the back door I had propped on entry, a rectangle of ordinary night framed in extraordinary orange. I moved sideways, letting my gear's book be a shield, letting the heat burn a layer of my fear clean off. The shepherd tried to follow my feet, and then allowed the pull of the loop to be the intelligence for both of us. Behind us, the bedroom exhaled a last sheet of fire that stroked the paint into curls. The sound was not a roar. It was a long, sustained argument in a voice that wasn't mine to answer. We reached the threshold, and the air changed from something hostile into something indifferent, which can feel like a kind of love in the right moment. Porch boards flexed under my knees. I turned to gather the rest of the shepherd's length over the sill and, because my body had not forgotten to notice beauty even here, saw the improbable snow ash falling against a starry sky, the flakes bright and then gone, the night curious but not invested. I laughed, a foolish bark. The shepherd, misunderstanding it as courage, answered with the smallest wag I have ever seen. Outside is where some stories insist on ending. Fire likes to make a spectacle of it. The roof went, not in a collapse but in a sighing surrender, the trusses folding like old men taking seats. A neighbor screamed in the polite way people do when they intend to be useful, but the world will not accept their hands as currency. I carried the shepherd to the wet grass, where the first line had already turned the yard into a mirror. Someone put a blanket under him that used to be a picnic. His paws flexed against the plaid. He coughed, and what left him was a cloud of everything he had survived asking to be air again. His eyes filmed and cleared. I learned the name the family had given him when they were still his Atlas. It suited him. Something about the way. He held the weight of the room until I could lift it. At the triage tent, the vet assigned a number to his air hunger and a shape to his future. She slid the cannula into a rhythm he could keep, and Atlas's ribs made a bellows of themselves, but each cycle asked the next to be less dramatic. He leaned his head against my thigh without the ceremony of trust. We were both too tired for theater, and I catalogued the losses written in his fur, the clipped whiskers, the singe marks crisped like dead leaves' edges, the smell of smoke that had worn him like a rumor and would for days. I took him home because the family had nowhere to put a living thing that night, and because my apartment was designed to be enough, on purpose, for moments exactly like this. He learned the room in circles, the way dogs do, as if drawing a map his body could read later in the dark. He drank from the bowl as if water had gone into witness protection, and he had just recognized it. He slept, not because he was no longer afraid, but because sleep is what bodies do when they have negotiated survival that day and want to be strong enough to negotiate again tomorrow. He dreamed the fire. I knew because his legs ran and stopped and ran, and his jaw clicked once, a punctuation mark for an invisible sentence. I woke and put the kettle on and pretended the steam rising from it spelled words of comfort in a language he understood. Morning absolved us both of some mistakes and none of the others. In the days after, the city's noises wore new costumes. The hiss of the espresso machine at the corner cafe was a gas leak to Atlas, until I let him watch it make 3 drinks in a row without consequence. The elevator's lurch at 3rd floor was a collapsing stairwell until I turned it into a game where treats fell from the ceiling when the doors opened on 2nd. The fire alarm test announced itself as an ending until I sat in the bathtub with him while it performed its duties and counted between repetitions out loud. 5 seconds of fear, 15 of relief. Fear learned to share. Atlas had a scar under his right foreleg where heat had lifted the hair and the skin had learned a new texture. When I touched near it, his muscles remarked that they remembered and then agreed I was not an aftershock. His ears, singed at the tips into faintly darker triangles, made him look perpetually thoughtful. Children felt this and spoke to him as if he were capable of opinion. He was. He loved the patch of sun that fell across the living room rug at 11:14 and then moved on like a slow, gold clock. He sat in it so still that dust motes considered changing alliances. When the first kitchen exhaust coughed smoke at the strip mall, Atlas returned to the ditch of himself. His body made small, official motions shrink, tilt, calculate, exit, look for a bathtub that isn't there. I knelt not as a command but as a building of smaller space. He put his brow to my shin, the gesture that means signature, contract, treaty, home. I said nothing. He decided the world had not written a new ending. We walked on. The call came on a Tuesday because disaster likes to ruin good words. Row house, heavy smoke, 2 rescued already, dog possibly inside. I did the checklist inside my skull. Checked the bottle, checked the webbing loop that had learned Atlas's dimensions so well it now felt like a spare limb. We went, we always go. The house was stingy with its door. The hallway was a book written in heat. Rooms introduced themselves and then bowed out. I found the dog under a bed in the rear room, eyes glassy with the resignation of those who have not learned that help keeps showing up. He was small and ridiculous, half cowlick, half toy. I slid him into my jacket and told my body to keep being a wall. The house talked smack about my chances. We turned its language into weather and moved through. Outside, Atlas waited behind the tape with the therapy team. He saw me and did not bark. He made his face soft the way diplomats do at summits. The girl who had been pulled out earlier saw the knot of fur in my arms and flooded with relief so sudden she had to sit down. Atlas went to her, not to be adored, but to be furniture, a person, while their legs remembered the politics of gravity. The small dog, newly appointed to the role of lesson, trembled and then decided the air had changed in favor of mammals. Cameras recorded nothing that mattered. The important thing was the slow, righteous thump of Atlas's tail against the asphalt, and the way the girl's ribs chose to practice being just ribs again. We came home to a room that had learned our history. I made tea and Atlas watched steam climb, as if it were a ghost he'd grown fond of. He lay heavy against my leg, not to pin me, but to anchor himself to this particular geography rug, mug, human, noise that belongs to machines we invite. Outside, a siren tried on the night and then changed its mind. Inside, Atlas slept. Fire had made a theologian of me, but not the kind with answers. I had learned only this, that some rescues begin in heat and end in light, and the space between is a series of decisions to remain where your fear says to leave. Weeks passed and habituated themselves to joy. Atlas learned the names of the delivery drivers without meeting them. He could tell by the gait, the rhythm of the elevator shaft, the 3 notes, knock of the woman who always forgot which package was hers. He escorted me to the shower each morning and lay on the bath mat, a sentry with a nose that could detect sorrow in steam. Children in the building drafted him into their rituals, 8 hands at once teaching him the shape of love in a language older than grammar. When the firehouse hosted the open day, he wore a red bandana that made strangers smile as if they'd been given an extra hour. He bore it with the dignity of a creature aware he was being used as an instrument for human healing and fine with the terms. One afternoon the family came, the ones whose house had taught us all about unfinished wiring and wind. They brought a photo album salvaged by a neighbor, corners charred, plastic pages puckered like burns healed badly. Atlas recognized their smell before I did, a cocktail of lavender detergent, baby shampoo, and grief trying not to be rude. He went to the boy first, whose wrist still wore a hospital band, and pressed there a notary public certifying the time. The mother touched Atlas's ear where the singe had made a permanent thought and wept once, a clean spill. "He was under my desk," she said. "He always hid there when the vacuum came out." I thought. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Atlas leaned so gently against her shin that she adjusted her balance without knowing why. We talked about guilt payable and guilt forgiven. Atlas modeled the latter. In the final image of that year, the city arranged a sunset so literal I forgave it. The glass towers burned without heat, and the river stole the sky's costume and wore it better. Atlas found the rectangle of light on the floor and lay so precisely inside it that it looked like the sun had decided to visit our rug. I stood at the sink with a cup that forgot it was empty and watched my own ghost in the window glass. A person set at last at a quiet tilt. Atlas lifted his head, decided I was worth the energy, and crossed the small ocean of hardwood to rest his brow against my shin. It is not that the world hushed. The city did what cities do. Sirens found errands, buses sighed, neighbors rearranged arguments into noise. But something in me made room for a silence with edges, a shape that could hold a dog and a man and a night that had once promised worse. If you ask me later how the fire ended, I will not tell you about pressure readings or flow rates or the righteous bites nozzles take from flame. I will say that it ended like this, with fur under my palm warming my bones through skin, with the smell of sinned hair replaced, at last, by the stubborn sweetness of dog, with the past downgrading itself to weather, with a kitchen where steam writes minor scripture, with a forehead pressed against a shin, as if signing the day into law, with a city that does not know which lives were nearly smaller, with a life measured not by the infernos I entered, but by the mornings I learned to stay. And if you press me for one image that contains all the others, I will give you Atlas in the dim of my living room. The light skimming his back like a hand that never burns, his eyes reflecting a piece he built himself plank by plank, and the sound he makes when he settles. A sound like a door quietly choosing to be closed in the safest way a door can choose. I will hand you that, and I will ask you to carry it the way I carry him now, not as a burden, but as proof that sometimes the flame gives back exactly what it tried to take. Years passed like the slow hush of embers cooling under dawn. The fire had long been reduced to stories told in classrooms, to training footage paused mid-frame when someone wanted to explain what courage looked like. I didn't wear the uniform anymore. Not because the body couldn't, but because the heart had learned a new rhythm. Some men retire into silence. I retired into purpose. Atlas stayed beside me through it all, a steady pulse in a world too fond of noise. Together we found work that asked less of our lungs and more of our patience. We joined a therapy program for survivors, people whose nights still smelled of smoke. Atlas would walk into the room before me, tail slow, eyes steady. That unspoken promise in his stance, "You're safe here, you're seen." The first time he did it, a child named Sam, maybe 8, maybe eternal, dropped the toy fire truck in his hands and started crying without sound. Atlas approached him like a memory sneaking in through an open window, placed his chin on the boy's knee and waited. That was all it took. A heartbeat, a pause, a bridge. I realized then that he had saved me so I could learn what saving really meant. The city built new shelters, cleaner codes, stricter laws. But the heart of what we did was always smaller. Moments between one frightened creature and another. I watched Atlas teach strangers what calm looks like when it's earned. He had a way of folding chaos into quiet. Firemen called him the old professor. Kids at the firehouse called him Captain Calm. He wore every name with grace, his muzzle now silver, his gait deliberate, his spirit impossibly young. We were invited once to a memorial for fallen firefighters. The stage was draped in light so thin it looked like glass. Atlas walked with me to the podium, nails tapping the wooden floor in a rhythm that echoed the pulse of the crowd. I didn't speak about loss or bravery. I spoke about small things. The sound of breathing under a helmet, the smell of wet fur in smoke, the miracle of choosing to go toward instead of away. Atlas sat beside me, watching the audience the way fire watches wind, curious, alive, reverent. When I said, "We didn't just save each other. We started something that keeps saving," he looked up as if to agree. As the years bent us both, I began writing letters to the places the fire had touched. Some were to families, some to myself. I wrote one to the house, or what was left of it, thanking it for letting us live, for teaching me how thin the line between fear and faith really is. Atlas would sit by my feet, the scratch of pen and the rhythm of his breathing syncing into a single language of closure. He grew slower, but he never stopped working. Even when his steps trembled, he'd insist on walking with me into the hospital rooms, tail flicking like a soft metronome. Nurses whispered that patients smiled more when he was near. One woman, skin pale as paper, lungs full of winter, stroked his head and whispered, "You smell like rain." Atlas wagged once, content to be weather instead of memory. The day he couldn't rise was the day I understood what real fire feels like. Not the one that burns walls, but the one that hollows you gently from the inside. I lay beside him, hand on his chest, the beat beneath my palm slowing but never uncertain. He looked at me, eyes full of light and distance all at once, and I said what I had said years before in a different smoke. "Hold on." He did, long enough for me to learn that sometimes holding on means letting go. He left quietly, no dramatics, just a long breath that didn't bother to return. I buried him beneath a tree on the edge of the fire training grounds, the same cottonwood where new recruits now practice rescues. I marked the spot with a collar tag and a promise that I'd keep doing the work, even without him leading the way. When the wind moves through those leaves, it sounds like applause. Now, when I visit schools or safety programs, I show the old footage. A clip of smoke, a shape of light, the flash of a tail disappearing into safety. The children always ask the same question, "Was he scared?" And I always answer, "Yes." That's how I knew he was brave. Atlas taught me that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the art of walking through it with love still intact. The world burned that night, but from its ashes, something more enduring rose, a simple truth. We're all rescuers in one way or another, trying to find our way toward someone's cry for help. And when I drive home through the dark, past the city lights that blink like tiny, patient hearts, I sometimes swear I see him in the rearview mirror, a reflection of silver fur, ears back, eyes calm. Just watching, just making sure the road stays clear. And I smile, whispering to the night, "We're still here, old friend." I used to think fire was loud, that its language was all roar and crackle, its only dialect destruction. But years have a way of translating noise into meaning. I've learned that real fire is quieter. It hums in the background of your thoughts long after the flames are gone. It lives in the small decisions. When to move forward, when to stay still, when to reach for something that might burn but needs you anyway. There are nights when I still wake to the echo of smoke alarms that aren't there. It's not fear anymore. It's memory stretching its legs, making sure I haven't forgotten. The air tastes clean, but I still inhale carefully, half expecting ash. And in those moments, I realize I don't miss the chaos. I miss the clarity. Inside a burning house, you know exactly who you are. The world shrinks to the size of a heartbeat, and a single purpose: get them out, live for that moment, or don't live at all. Outside, life's decisions are messier. Subtle burns, slower choices, no alarms to tell you when something precious is turning to smoke. Atlas taught me that every creature has its own kind of flame. The kind that doesn't destroy, but endures. His was loyalty. Mine was stubbornness disguised as duty. Together we built something out of all the things the fire tried to take. Sometimes I wonder if that's why we met, because I needed to understand that survival isn't the same as healing, and that healing isn't the same as forgetting. When I close my eyes, I can still see that house. Walls flexing under pressure, light shattering like stained glass, the sound of his paws scraping against tile. But what stays with me most isn't the fire, it's the pause afterward. That still second when the world decided we were worth keeping. I've come to think that's where love begins, in the pause after fear, when both sides stop running. People ask me if rescuing animals ever gets easier. It doesn't. You get better at it, maybe, but never comfortable. You learn to accept that heartbreak and hope weigh the same, and you have to carry both if you want to make it out whole. You learn that courage often looks like hesitation, the kind that says, "I'm scared, but I'm going anyway." Sometimes I sit on the balcony at night, listening to the hum of the city. Cars moving like slow fireflies, wind threading through the railings, a soft chorus of distant living. I picture Atlas in those sounds, his steady breath syncing with the world's rhythm. I used to think I'd never stop missing him. Now I know you don't stop missing. You just learn to live beside the missing until it becomes part of your balance. Like a scar, it doesn't hurt forever, but it never forgets why it's there. When the academy invites me to speak to new recruits, I don't tell them about the equipment or the technique. I tell them about silence, about how to listen, to walls, to breathing, to the tone in someone's scream. I tell them that sometimes the bravest sound you'll ever make is a whisper meant for someone who can't answer. That courage isn't found in the fire. It's found in the moment you choose to go back in. The fire gave me many things: fear, pain, memory, humility. But most of all, it gave me presence. It forced me to understand how fragile the world is, and how beautiful it can be when you stop trying to control it. I remember the first night after the rescue, when Atlas finally slept without trembling. The apartment was still thick with smoke smell, the windows open to a forgiving sky. I sat there watching him, his chest rising and falling like waves that had finally found the shore. That sound, the sound of breathing, it became my definition of peace. Years later, I still measure time by that rhythm. When the wind rushes through an open door, when my heart beats against my ribs after a long climb, when I hear a stranger exhale in relief, I think of him. I think of what it means to breathe freely, and how many things have to go right in the world for that to happen. We never really outgrow our fires. We just learn how to walk through them without losing ourselves. The embers stay, reminders of moments when the world asked too much of us, and we still said yes. But if you're lucky, those embers become something else: warmth. And that's what Atlas left me. Not the memory of heat, but the memory of warmth. The kind that doesn't fade, doesn't burn, doesn't demand. Just exists, patient, glowing enough. I keep his collar on my desk, the metal tag scratched and dulled by time. Some mornings, sunlight catches it, and the reflection flashes against the wall like a spark that refuses to die. And every time it happens, I smile. Because maybe that's the lesson the fire was always trying to teach, that light isn't destroyed by destruction. It's revealed by it. So now, when someone asks me why I still do what I do, why I keep showing up for rescues, for strangers, for dogs who have forgotten the sound of kindness, I tell them the truth. Because once you've carried something out of the fire, once you've held life against your chest and felt it trust you to keep the world out, You never stop hearing that call. And every time it comes, no matter how far away, no matter how tired you are, you go. Because love doesn't run from the fire. It walks straight through it and finds its way home. In the quiet after years of fire and rescue, I sit beneath the same open sky where it all began. The world is still, no sirens, no smoke, just wind brushing through the trees. Atlas's collar rests in my hand, the metal warm from sunlight. I close my eyes and hear his steady breath, the rhythm that once pulled both of us from the flames. The fire taught me how fragile life is. He taught me how strong love can be. And somewhere between the two, I finally learned. We were never escaping the fire. We were becoming its light.